Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Memory Lab Goals and Expectations, which is the second webinar in a series of 8 webinars intended to help build and strengthen a network of memory labs in California. Many thanks to the California State Library for supporting this series and also for establishing a new CopyCat grant program to build and support memory labs in the state. It's a very exciting year. My name is Pamela Vadakan. I'm Director of California Revealed, which is a California State Library initiative that helps public libraries and other local heritage groups digitize, preserve, and make available online collections related to state history. And I'm joined by my colleague, Digital Services Librarian, Allison Ryan from California.
Hey, everyone.
She's here to catch questions and comments in the chat, so feel free to add questions, comments, whatever you'd like, and we'll catch up at the end. We should have hopefully a little bit of time in the end to open up for discussion. So thank you, Allison, for monitoring the chat. And there's also a Q&A box happening too, which you can also throw questions in there too. So our special guest today is Suzanne M., Acting Senior Librarian for the Digitization and Special Collections Department at Los Angeles Public Library. Her job is to ensure that staff, training, resources, and processes are in place to provide efficient and effective cataloging and metadata services for special collections material, as well as prioritizing items for digitization. Hi, Suzanne.
Hi, thank you, Pamela, for inviting me to join in on this webinar. When I took on this Memory Lab Network grant through DCPL and IMLS, I was a metadata librarian at the time, and we received $5,000 in seed grant money for the lab. So we had to get creative in terms of resourcing and also like finding equipment. There were many challenges. LAPL may seem like we have it all together, but there were a lot of lessons we learned along the way, and more challenges still that I hope you all can learn from. I was one of 2 Memory Lab Network ambassadors for LAPL, and I was fortunate enough to have my partner, Kurt Thumb, work with me, who was, he used to work in television as a video editor. So that really helped us move our lab along. But yeah, I'm grateful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for being here. So the first half of this webinar is going to be mostly Suzanne and I talking, presenting. And then the second half, I'm going to open it up to a meeting format. Hopefully this will work out where you all can speak and we can see you if you'd like. You can totally disable your cameras, no pressure, of course, totally optional. But I really hope we'll have some time in the end for discussion and sharing ups and downs of your own planning process. This is all part of the learning experience. So again, just feel free to add comments or questions as we go along in the chat, and we'll catch up in the end. I'm sorry we don't really have time to go around the room for introductions, but if you haven't already, please introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you're coming from. That'd be great, thank you. So this is just to give you a sense of our webinar series that we're planning for the next 8 months. We're recording each webinar, so the January webinar starring Siobhan Hagen is up already, and there's links on our Memory Labs page, californiarevealed.org/memorylabs. The webinars are totally optional, but we do hope you'll attend consecutively because the sessions do build upon each other. Depending on where you are, you're also welcome to pop in. We're just excited to kind of start building this training for reference and building out our network in California. And I do want to give a shout out to Siobhan Hagen. This training is based on her training model. There's a link there for her deep dive. There's so many resources, so many videos there. So I do encourage you all to build upon your training just through all of the resources that she makes available. And the idea of this series is that within this 8-month period, we've set this up specifically to speak to those who received CopyCat grants this year from the State Library. I know some of you are here, so it's really exciting to meet some of you all. And of course, we welcome anyone who's started memory labs, or if you're interested in starting a memory lab, you could always apply for a CopyCat grant in the future. So we're just going to get right into it. I hope you all did your homework for this webinar. There is a planning document available that will go through a series of questions, kind of help you plan and sketch out your goals for your memory lab. I can add a link in the chat so that you have it handy. You can always adjust your plan, but it's good to state your intentions, to articulate your goals, and then use your intentions to kind of measure your success when it's time for evaluation and reporting. So the big questions right at the start on this first page of this planning document is, what are your community's needs and what histories are valuable to your community? And that's really the first place to begin. That'll kind of help you plan out like what formats you want to accommodate and the kind of space that you may need. Really start with the community, I think, is important. And really all stakeholders should consider these questions and bring in as many stakeholders as you can. Don't do this alone. And try to get support across departments. Just keep everyone's expectations in check, but bring everyone together. I think that building that enthusiasm and initiative is a really great start. And it will be your foundation. And yeah, just try to be honest about your challenges and also your strengths. You can always use your strengths, identify your available resources within your library, and then think about how you can leverage those resources through your community crowdsourcing or possibly fundraising, which is probably a very real reality for a lot of y'all out there. So these are the basic topics in the planning document. And this is from Siobhan's deep dive. So this just helps you articulate your goals. And from there, you can create action items, ideally with due dates. You could assign your staff, volunteers, just consider it as a working document. And so if you all have that open now, feel free to take notes as we go along. This morning, we're going to go through each section of the planning document, and I'll hit on the big picture considerations, and then Suzanne is going to provide her invaluable experience of building out LAPL's lab. So we'll kind of go back and forth.
And with us coming up on a year of closure, I have been thinking about how things are going to be with the memory lab when we reopen. Actually, the Octavia lab staff and our staff in digitization and special collections have put together a document like with considerations, how we're going to clean the equipment, how many staff can we accommodate in the lab safely. And I'll share that document when we have that available, or I can make that available. But we still do anticipate that reopening is going to be a ways away, a few months, if not several months from now. I mean, I see it as a blessing in a way. It allows us to kind of catch up on the things that we wanted to improve on in the memory lab from before. We can move on to the next slide, Pamela.
Yeah, so right off the bat, as I said, start with your community and consider who's already interested in your memory lab and how you might build upon that audience. And then who else are you trying to reach beyond just kind of your immediate folks? Like you may want to consider the mobile possibility of traveling to reach the communities you want to reach. And we will touch on mobile scenarios. So we're fortunate because Suzanne's doing both, so she'll touch on both options. And yeah, again, just think about too, accessibility. Will you require an orientation to use the equipment? Will you require an ID? Should you have guides and languages beyond English? And how will you accommodate patrons with disabilities? And you might want to consider surveying your patrons to get a sense of like the needs of your community.
So actually for LAPL, we do require an orientation just because we want, not only to educate people on how to preserve their materials for the long term, but also to ensure they're following policy and that they're treating the equipment properly. We require patrons to have an LAPL library card. We have not yet created guides in other languages, but I don't. We do have the fortune to have a translation team that's made up of different librarians throughout the LAPL system, who we could call on to translate guides into Spanish or other languages if needed. As far as patrons with disabilities, we have, the Octavia Lab is accessible by elevator. So that helps with accessibility, and the stations themselves are spaced in such a way to accommodate, that would be able to accommodate wheelchairs. So those are the accessibility considerations that we have. And next slide.
As Siobhan says, there's no such thing as a cookie cutter memory lab. Like, they're unique like snowflakes. So that's why I look forward to all of us kind of talking about our different spaces, because I know you have to be adaptable, and it's a balance between scalability, expense, quality, mobility. You may want to consider needing to set up, break down, set up. So some of the questions to ask yourself that I just pulled from the planning document include, like, do you have available space? If you don't have space, maybe there's a makerspace or labs department that could offer space. And then of course, think about, do you need to be portable?
So here are some considerations about the physical space that we would recommend anyone who's working on a memory lab to consider. The square footage of the space, seating, power, your network, available network, any noise that might come through, windows, especially as it relates to privacy, lighting, environmental controls for the protection of people's mementos, security. So as you'll see in the next few slides, since our memory lab, our DIY memory lab is located in our makerspace, the Octavia Lab, that space has only one entrance, and that same entrance can only be used as an exit, and patrons have to pass by a staff kiosk, so that enables better security. Mobility of your equipment is a big factor too. Even though this DIY memory lab is permanently stationed in the Octavia Lab, we did have to incorporate some mobility for like the audio conversion, as you'll see in coming slides. Scalability, donations, timing, signage, and storage. And so next slide. So there's an image of the entrance to the Octavia Lab. So that same entrance is also the exit. And next slide. There's the staff kiosk and a set of 3D printers that patrons pass by through the entrance. Patrons would have to check in here before each appointment with their LAPL library card. Staff there will also ensure that patrons have a signed user agreement on file. Next slide. Here are just a couple of other stations that you'll pass by on the way to the DIY Memory Lab, which is the laser cutter, and HTC Vive, which is a virtual reality station. So there are a number of different types of equipment in here, which is another consideration too when you're thinking about space, because like you can't necessarily expect staff to master all of these different pieces of equipment. So that is why we didn't rely solely on staff who are stationed at the Octavia Lab. We included them in our trainings, but we also brought in our own staff and staff from other departments. Next slide. So, so the systems that you set up will support your workflow. So you're going to want to think about how you're going to communicate that process to your patrons, what level of do-it-yourself you are expecting from them through in-person or online orientations. DC Public Library inspired us to publish our workflows online in order to make it available to patrons to reference before they come in for their appointments. Next slide. And so so as Pamela mentioned, we have two systems. So the DIY Memory Lab is in-house. It's completely do-it-yourself by appointment only. And we actually use a spreadsheet to book appointments. You can kind of see here on the right how it works. It's really easy to have a lo-fi appointment system if you don't have a centralized reservation system in place. You can set up drop-down menus to indicate, what kind of equipment's being checked out, patron information, whether they're going to what format they're going to be converting, and whether they show up or not. You can keep track of all of that here. We do offer the mandatory orientation twice a month. We try to offer it on a Saturday to get people who are working during the week, and then towards the evening on one day on a weekday. And users, they are responsible for their own storage, and we outline in the orientation what type of storage is acceptable. The user agreement we pass out at the orientation too, for them to complete, and they can just bring it in with their library card to set up an appointment if they would like. And and then finally, we have an optional feedback form after patrons have completed their appointment with the digitization station. The appointments, we have our appointments actually last up to 4 hours. Initially, we had set them up for 2 hours, but we found that that wasn't enough time for video conversion, because you also have to compress the files. So yeah, we gave people the opportunity to spend 4 hours, 1 appointment per person, per station, per week, to give people a fair chance at booking appointments. Patrons have requested video tutorials, which we will consider adding when the library reopens. Next slide. So the LAPL's Mobile Memory Lab serves programming that actively collects local history materials from community members. We do those through scanning days and oral history days. So this is in contrast to the in-house system or the in-house stations, which are mainly a service for patrons to preserve their own materials. For the mobile version, it's definitely takes more time to set up and break down the equipment. We've had the materials shipped internally through our shipping department to other branches for programs, which actually, so far so good. No damage to equipment. That Pelican Cases have done a really great job of maintaining the equipment and without damage. But each case does have an equipment list that you have to check off, before you send it out, and when you send it back. And you have to account for travel time as well. We always hold mobile memory lab programs inside a branch or inside a community facility. The output is not as high because the staff is not only digitizing, but they're also collecting metadata. There's the likelihood too of more failure or troubleshooting when you're out on the road. Next slide. So considerations for mobile equipment, you'll want to keep it as light as possible, both in terms of weight and square footage. We tried to do that. It's still quite heavy, even with that, because the configuration we had to go with was with a scanning. It wasn't just 1 case per type of program. It was like you had to have 2. So like we have like a super large, a medium, and a small case, and you have to, depending on the type of programming, you have to do 2 of out of the 3 of those cases. And you'll see that in a feature slide with the inventory lists. Next slide.
So ideally, IT and support goes hand in hand with your systems, right? That's the ideal. And hopefully you have an IT person or people, if you're so lucky. They should, of course, be aware of the memory lab because there's so much tech involved. And ideally, you should involve them early in the planning for the computer station so they can help with setup and security. And this is also an area where you should start planning what kind of files you want to create, what quality, which considerations will affect the file size. So think about like what if you are planning to keep copies of the files, discuss storage options with IT staff. Is there server space available, or will you need to maintain hard drive backups? And if you don't plan to save the files, can the IT staff help set up automatic wiping of the computers after each use? And then of course you want to think about security too, is how will you ensure your memory lab computers don't get viruses and they remain secure? Oops. Sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay. At LAPL, we have a guest login for patrons with limited permissions in order to help prevent infections from viruses. The stations are also wireless only for that same reason. When we first started the project, IT assigned to us a senior systems analyst who is personally interested in working with legacy formats, and so he's been great. He's sat in on trainings with us. He's also tried to bring in other IT staff to be included in our training. So we got a couple of other IT staff who are more familiar with how the memory lab works. But overall, their main responsibility is helping us with the deep freeze, which wipes the hard drive clean. Not wipes the hard drive clean, but it brings the station back to the state it was before a patron used it, in order to again keep the station free of viruses and any modification or updates that would potentially cause software to not function properly anymore. It doesn't hurt to ask. I tried asking, they said no, but if I've learned anything through this process is that don't ask, don't get. You could try asking IT staff if they're willing to also help patrons with the memory lab as well. Next slide.
Is it a goal for your organization to use the memory lab as a mechanism for collecting for your archives? How will you communicate this option to patrons? And if it isn't a priority, how do you plan to educate patrons about their preservation options with additional resources and instruction? Because we really do want the files to live on. It's not just about digitization, right? We really want to preserve these memories. So does your archive have a selection policy? What do you anticipate your policy will be if there's not one already in place? And I do have to give a shout out to California Revealed Services. This really is an opportunity if you want support for preservation and online access. We would be happy to take copies of the files. This is if you're willing to steward the files and save them for us, and if the patron's willing to share. But I would love to continue conversations and open up that possibility. So please, reach out if you'd like to participate.
At LAPL, our collecting focus is on the diverse history of the greater LA region. And initially, the materials that were being converted by patrons at the DIY Memory Lab were not being collected. We saw that a lot of the materials that were being brought in weren't necessarily within our scope because in LA, a lot of people aren't necessarily from LA. But after some discussions I've had with Pamela, moving forward when we've reopened the memory lab, we will try out doing collection with California Revealed moving forward. And in that case, we would, of course, expand our scope to all of California. And we would, mention that in our orientation to prompt patrons who might be interested in donating to opt in and, let us know that we can collect from them. And then, on the other end of things, as I already mentioned, the mobile memory lab, through our scanning days and oral history days, of course, we do try we have been trying to collect local history materials. For that, you will, if you do go with this type of memory lab, you will inevitably get patrons who come in thinking it's a digitization service, or they might bring things that are out of scope. if they do, we still just digitize the materials for them as a service. And it's an opportunity to teach them about digital preservation while they're waiting for their materials. Next slide. Oh, sorry. There was Pam had asked me to talk also about the oral history component of our mobile program. So we were actually, when we put together, this was a separate grant for the Mobile Memory Lab. It was also $5,000 through the LA Library Foundation. And we were actually inspired by the program at Queens Public Library, which was Queens Public Library and Brooklyn Public Library, which created this toolkit called Culture in Transit. And they were collecting not only paper-based materials, but also oral histories. So yeah, that's why we added the oral history aspect. And next slide.
The written policies and procedures that you put together really should build upon your systems plan and document your expected workflows, just to have it down for your own documentation purposes, but also, again, to manage expectations of your staff and the public. The Memory Lab's Network's Deep Dive document links out to many examples, including LAPL's Memory Lab site. And so you can kind of pick and choose which policies work for you. So I just encourage you to check out what people are currently doing with their labs and go from there.
Yeah, and some of the major considerations that you want to take into account when you're putting together your policies and procedures are you'll want to respect the existing policy of the space where your memory lab lives. And your digitization stations are going to be very popular. So you want to make sure the policy provides each user a fair chance to book appointments, because some patrons, if given the opportunity, they're going to book an appointment every single day of the week to transfer their materials. Then you'll also want to ensure there are appointment slots that allow enough time for both conversion and compression, especially if you're transferring VHS, Umatic, or if you're really up for the challenge, Betamax. Betamax. So you'll also want to set a limit for how much hand-holding staff can do for users. A lot of the patrons who tend to be interested, I would say roughly half, are going to be a bit older population and not necessarily as computer savvy or tech savvy. So that's going to be really important. And you'll also want to establish what type of material is prohibited. Like we mentioned in our orientation about copyright materials, that people shouldn't be transferring those. And we also have a policy that because Octavia Lab allows patrons who are aged between 12 and 17 to use the lab, materials that's transferred should be appropriate for viewing by those age groups. Next slide. So here are some of the, these are, I won't go through every single policy, but the next few slides we have a few that you can use as an example. So basically, yeah, some of these I've already talked about, but for the late policy, you see here, we say that if you're over 10 minutes late, your reservation will be canceled and made available to other customers. We can be a little bit lax about that, considering that our lab is located in downtown LA. especially if it's the patron's first time, it can be tricky getting down there. If they give a courtesy call with a heads up on the lateness, we'll definitely accommodate for that. Lab users are required to cancel reservations if they can't use up their slots, so that, we give other people a fair chance to use the station. Next slide. Obviously, no food and drink in the lab. We don't want those to attract pests or bring potential damage to the equipment. Besides the fact that patrons have to save their own files on their own storage media, we will also refuse to store their materials in the lab when they're not there. They should be responsible for their own materials. Next slide. So staff assistance, we give people the expectation that basic information could be provided by staff about the lab. For in-depth assistance, they could attend an additional orientation session or request either a Wednesday or Friday appointment. That's when we have a dedicated staff member from digitization and special collections who can give more in-depth instruction. And then, you'll want to include something, related to user liability and liability limitation in terms of using the equipment as well. So users, they sign an agreement, saying they agree to abide by all of these lab policies, and we keep that agreement on file. Next slide.
So this is a big topic that we actually devote a whole webinar to later this spring in May. So at minimum, this is when you want to start thinking about what pieces of equipment do you want to start with. And I do encourage you all to start simple. Start with your most popular materials based on your community survey, and think about at minimum, VHS is extremely popular, and then of course photo, slide, negative scanning. That's what I've heard too anecdotally from Siobhan. And just start building your inventory of equipment now. Really, like the sooner you start, the sooner you can start hunting, because it can be hard to find equipment. This is also a place where you should consider your partnerships outside your organization. Who else may have equipment? You might want to consider how your memory lab could be like a regional digitization hub. So multiple organizations could come in and use your equipment. And then of course, try to think of maybe local AV archivists who might be around, who could help with support, advice, troubleshooting. And they're out there, and I'm happy to connect you to through AMIA, the Association of Moving Image Archivists. They're a great group.
So some considerations you'll want to take for equipment and repairs include donations. We at LAPL actually received quite a big donation from a local TV station called KJLA. What happened was I looked up a Wikipedia page of all of the TV stations in LA, and I contacted every single one of them. I basically sent the same letter to each of them and listed exactly what type of equipment we were looking for. They were one that actually still had held on to their legacy equipment. A lot of their stations had already gotten rid of old equipment, but KGLA, fortunately, they didn't want to just throw away the equipment. They wanted to make sure that it was used. So we got a huge haul from them, and we were able to actually send out the extra monitors we got from them to other members of the Memory Lab network, as well as some local archives. We offered it up to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences archives. There is going to be quite low stock if you're looking like through traditional vendors, and they will be quite expensive if you're going through a vendor. So donations, if possible, are great. Vendor, and there are very few vendors as well that offer these types of equipment. There's only one locally in LA that still sells broadcast, old broadcast equipment, and it was kind of like, since they're the only game in town, like, you're kind of stuck, having to rely on this one vendor, and then technology constraints, additions, like, different parts may be difficult to replace, hard to find. Your IT support will be limited because they won't necessarily know how to use these equipment. And then mobility is going to be an issue too if you're working with a lot of AV equipment, and then the shipping. Shipping, especially if you're working with AV equipment, that's going to be quite a lot. So for all of these things, you'll want to strike up a really good relationship with your, whatever your procurement office is. In our case, it was the library business office. And for repairs, for quite a long time, I was relying on Kurt Thumb, who I mentioned earlier, but he has since retired. So I've found like there's one vendor still that's located in Burbank that does service VCRs. But for those of you who might be in other regions, would be a little more difficult to come by. Strange, you don't want to rely on YouTube too much. Because there's varying information. Siobhan has put together a great series of video tutorials which Pamela has told me about, that you can reference. Although I will say I did once reference a YouTube video to fix a mini disc player. Like, basically one of the belts in the mini disc had worn out, so it wasn't taking discs. And I found a YouTube video that basically said you can replace that belt with a 3/8 rubber band, which is used in braces. So really inexpensive fix, something really simple like that. And I ran it by Kurt before I did it, and he's like, yeah, I used to do that all the time. So yeah, I did end up fixing it that way. Yeah, next slide. And I'll power through these next 3 slides, but these are photos of the setup that we have for the DIY Memory Lab. We have prosumer, well, actually a prosumer and a professional deck in here, a DV cam deck, a U-matic deck here at the bottom, a TV monitor. Time disc corrector is kind of tiny, it's hard to see, and the Blackmagic analog to digital converter, along with the power conditioner. And this one is on wheels. It has a door that you can close and lock if, during times when the lab is closed. Next slide. So this is another, so initially we had audio visual all in one station, but as we got more equipment, the decks outgrew that station. So we, as you saw in the previous video, we only put video in that one station now. And then we have a scanning and audio conversion station. So whenever someone wants to do audio, we'll wheel out this rack that has a vinyl player that converts LPs and 45s. It has an audio cassette deck, a mini desk deck, a digital audio tape deck, which I still have not set up the workflow for, but we're getting ready for that. And then an open reel audio player. The CD and DVD conversion is built in actually to the station. So that one won't have to wheel this out for that. And next slide. And then here's of course, the computer. It was a retired computer from the IT department that they weren't using. It was, quite good enough for what we were wanting to do with it. 8 gigabytes of RAM with 500 gigabytes of storage, and the CD and DVD writers definitely, helpful. Like we don't have to have a deck for that. Then the flatbed scanner here that also does film scanning, and the 3.5-inch floppy disk drive is something that we store in those white drawers down under the desk. Patrons can check that out as an accessory if they're transferring disks. Next slide. These inventories, I can share them with you if you'd like. I believe the resources doc that's going to be sent out to you has like the full inventory list. This is the one like for each of the Pelican cases. So here's the largest case for flatbed scanning. It has, our Epson Expression 1200 or 12,000 Excel scanner, transparency and photo holders, our light stand, pole, and base plate. So in addition to scanning, we also wanted to have overhead camera-based digitization for 3D objects and albums. So that's part of that. And then we included a headset because we thought, like, if we got to a certain point where we had collected enough oral histories, we could have people listen to oral histories while they were waiting for their materials to be digitized. So like in our early programs, we didn't get to do that, but yeah, that's why that's there. And the mouse. I hadn't mentioned this earlier, but the materials that we collect through the Mobile Memory Lab, they're not only for copies for the patrons to take home, but we also ingest them into our collections, make them available through TESSA, our online digital portal, which in turn is aggregated out to Calsphere and DPLA. Next slide. And then here's the medium Pelican case. I won't go through all of the items, but for the scanning days, you would need that big case along with this medium case because there's equipment in between. There's a laptop that's shared in between for that type of programming. And then next slide. And then the smaller cases for the oral histories. These are, the recorder, the microphone, and everything else we need for conducting an oral history. We need that laptop from the medium case, so we have to send out, the medium and the small case for the oral history days. Next slide.
So in addition to the lab itself, memory labs often offer educational resources, guidelines, and training around the digitization process and digital preservation. And at minimum, most labs, like at LAPL, offer an orientation to review the equipment and workflows. So many of you may already offer classes around genealogy, preservation, digital technology that can naturally tie in with your memory labs. And there are also so many existing courses online too that you could build upon or just use for training. And think too how this training that you offer your patrons, you could also offer to your staff, because you may need to train additional staff on the equipment, how to troubleshoot, and then also recruit them to teach workshops and classes to the public.
So this is a resources page that's up on the Memory Lab webpage for LAPL. And this is something that you can reference staff to. I could definitely build this out more with more resources that because like as you'll find like doing trainings in person can be quite time consuming. So building in ways that you can train staff, kind of kill two birds with one stone is really going to help. I had mentioned earlier about inviting staff to your orientations and workshops for the public as a mode of training, as part of their training. And then like if, people really like for these types of workflows find video to be really helpful. So there are videos that exist that you can definitely pull and use so that you're not all that you're not just doing, your two ambassadors or whoever you're assigned to are doing all the work. Next slide. And these are some descriptions of the classes that have been offered at LAPL through the Memory Lab. I had actually put together a training site internally for staff with the slide decks and the transcripts for each of these programs, and so that staff who are in the branches, if they want to, they can offer this type of programming, and it's free programming. So, and it's all in kind of like a toolkit for them. Yeah, so our regular Memory Lab orientation, and then initially when we started the Memory Lab Network grant, we were asked to offer workshops twice a month. So we did the Think Like an Archivist and Digital Preservation Basics twice a month. But we've now moved to holding like the three listed here. So planning for your digital afterlife additionally per quarter. So it's not so heavy since we're offering the orientation more often. That one is in much more demand than the educational workshops. Next slide. And so staff training considerations, you'll want to assign at least 2 ambassadors, but they're not going to be the only ones doing the work. You'll want to train as many other staff as possible to provide some sort of like scaffolding and to account for people promote or retire. You'll have other people who you could rely on. The biggest challenge I found in maintaining staff to is resistance to change, as well as the fear of unfamiliar technology. So if you find some way to provide incentives. Like the incentive we provided was to staff who would help out with the memory lab could transfer their own materials like on a designated day of the week. So we do it every Thursday. Like all morning, people could set up an appointment and transfer their materials. You'll want to let go of the idea that you have to be an expert. I myself do not consider myself to be an expert. You're going to be need to be adaptable and always learning. Sometimes you'll have people come in who may know more than you, and you can learn from them as well. Failing fast and often is okay. I've mentioned a little bit already about recruiting outside of your own department, if possible, if you're if you're at a location that has multiple departments, and try to identify staff and volunteers who will champion the memory lab. So initially, like this is something we kind of learned later. We initially relied on volunteer staff. So what I did there was I set a minimum commitment, certain number of hours per month. I tried to recruit at regular intervals, but I really found ultimately, like, I had to be able to designate permanent staff to the project, being able, or creating and communicating out a schedule clearly is going to be really important for that as well. Next slide.
So,
and one more thing about trade. Sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries.
Sorry, I just wanted to mention we have put together a DIY Memory Lab staff handbook that's available to everyone who's involved in the Memory Lab, and we can share that out with the participants today too.
That's great, thank you. So this is an area where maybe this is like the most intuitive part is actually getting the word out about your lab, and maybe you already have a marketing or communications department, PR folks who can help you with this. But again, like, think about your local partnerships. Who could you work with to get the word out about the memory lab? And I really love, there's a little piece of advice from the planning document about practicing your elevator speech about the memory lab and delivering it to different audiences like friends, patrons, staff, administrators. You really want to build out that buy-in as early as possible.
So at LAPL, we did a lot of collaboration across library departments and branches. And this was kind of like an outreach for our department throughout our own system, because a lot of staff are puzzled about what it is we do in digitization and special collections. So this gives them an opportunity to see the type of work we do. And with 73 branches, like, we have a lot of librarians who already know their communities and are connected with local organizations that they could leverage when we do programming at their branches. So that's where we started. And we towards later on, we went on to connect with local community organizations. And that first slide that had the 3 posters, those were actually, I created those before the PR department came into the picture. We're using Canva and Lucid Press, which are free free platforms that you can use to create really professional looking flyers. I highly recommend them. They do have some premium content, but the free content is, just as good, I think. Don't, if you don't have a PR department, you don't have to, you don't have to worry about that too much. The two flyers that are on the next slide, those were the ones that were created internally by our PR department. And there is some like lead time that they need before they're able to complete requests. So make sure you build those in if that's needed. And next slide. So as I mentioned, we worked a lot with our branch and subject department librarians, friends groups. Our librarians did outreach to friends groups, and after we had done our first year's worth of mobile memory lab programming, we actually had a handful of friends groups reach out to us asking us to bring the program to their branch. And then Octavia Lab, they run regular tours through, like, every day they're open. They run regular tours because they're patrons who visit the library who are like, what is that space about? Like, they're not familiar with the maker space. And so we've included the DIY Memory Lab as part of that tour script. So that's, another way to raise awareness. Media coverage, the PR department put out some press releases for us. The library webpage, if you're able to have a link to your Memory Lab page somewhere prominently on your library homepage, that is going to help a lot, help bring visibility to your program. We have pamphlets created in collaboration with Octavia Lab, bookmarks specifically for our DIY Memory Lab and Mobile Memory Lab, and of course, the awesome zines that the DC Public Library created. We hand those out constantly. They're really great educational resources. Next slide. Here's a list of some of the branches that we worked with for our scanning days. And there's a photo here of a couple of our staff, Anita Martinez and Maria Novoa, collecting metadata from patrons at a scanning day. In our system, we also have, since we're so large, we're split into 5 different regions. And I was able to present the Memory Lab programs to some of the regional adult librarian meetings to encourage adult librarians to put on this type of programming in their own branches. Because when I was holding the workshops in downtown, there were people who were traveling from 25 miles away to come to the workshop and asking, why can't you offer these branches or offer these programs at in our branch or near our branches. So that was why I went and put out those or presented at those meetings. And then we more recently have struck an agreement with our engagement and outreach department, which has created these mobile outreach units with vans that provide different types of programming. And we asked them, could we incorporate the Mobile Memory Lab into these mobile outreach units? And this happened during the pandemic. So it's yet to be seen how it will roll out when we reopen again. And then, also made some connections with the City of LA's Department of Aging to promote the programs. And right before the pandemic hit, we were going to work with Angeles Plaza, which is a senior residential facility that's right near downtown, near Central Library. So yeah, there are a lot of possibilities that you can work out. Next slide.
We actually have a webinar coming up all about evaluation in July. So stay tuned for that. But this is basically where you want to think about, having an exit survey. How are you going to track the usage of your memory lab, and also survey staff as you're going through your staff training, because as we mentioned earlier, it's good to just stay adaptable and open to feedback and listen to the needs of your communities and change it up if you have to.
So this is an example of our exit survey that we gave out at workshops, and we adapted it, or we developed it using PLA's project outcome website. So that's just projectoutcome.org, and it's really easy to use. We also, in turn, took these questions and developed an online feedback form in the next slide for the DIY memory lab. So after people use the digitization station, we asked them to complete this feedback form. And next slide, we have a little more close up of what type of questions we ask. So how many times have you used the digitization stations? What formats did you transfer? Do you feel more confident about the digitization process? What did you like most about using the stations? What could the library do to improve your learning? Any comments or suggestions, and age group. For workshops, patrons are more inclined to, we pretty much would get feedback forms from everybody, because we would pass them out during or towards the end of the workshop, and prompt people to fill it out. It's a little bit harder to get everyone to submit a feedback form after they use the digitization station, but it's still good data to collect. Next slide.
This is a huge topic, and we do have a webinar specifically about this at the end in August. It's a constant thread that kind of runs through each topic. And as we've discussed already, it's not just about having the initiative, but then continuing what you started. Equipment maintenance is a big challenge, as we've talked about. And you also want to just keep looking forward, consider expanding services, adding formats if possible, in response to the needs of your community. And so Suzanne's going to speak a little bit about some of the challenges of sustainability.
If possible, if you can incorporate staff who already work in the space where your memory lab's going to be, try to do so. I found it to be a great help with the Octavia lab, working with them, and they've been very receptive to taking on the training for the memory lab. They're doing the best they can because they have to keep track of how to use all of this other complex equipment. But their support has been invaluable. And then inviting staff to memory lab workshops and orientations as part of their training, as a more efficient way of providing training. I also schedule monthly times or weekly times when staff can digitize their own materials in the lab, so they can remain in practice, because when you don't do it for a while, it kind of you get out of practice. Like we're putting together this webinar made me realize how much I had kind of had to switch gears again, because I hadn't thought about this in such a long time. Next slide. I also schedule monthly deck cleaning with staff. So I lay out all the decks and have people, have staff come in and work on cleaning and discuss issues and successes, or just, socialize. And it's a great way to like also bring in like issues that may have come up in the lab, and providing like a little short lesson as well, which I'll try to work that into the deck cleaning session. Solicit donations. So we have a slide in our orientation asking people for which types of equipment we're looking for. And we've had quite a bit of success actually from this. We've gotten a reel-to-reel player, as well as like an extra vinyl player. And other donation offers have trickled through to this way. And make sure you have a list of the specific models or types of equipment that you want. And as as you're running these programs and admin sees the value of the memory lab, they will be more inclined to direct funding towards new equipment and repairs. We've found that to apply here at LAPL. When one of our VCRs that we had initially gotten from the TV station, it was quite an old one. It hadn't been serviced in a while. It was working when we got it, and then it stopped working. Our administration was supportive in helping us to purchase another one from that local vendor that I spoke about, which it was quite expensive, but they did provide that support. So yeah. Next slide.
We did it. Suzanne, thank you so much. It's a very ambitious planning document, so we were excited to we're up for the challenge, and we did it. We have a little bit of time for questions and comments. And I'm going to bring Alice and all of you back. So if you want to throw in questions in the chat, that's fine. And then I was going to try to enable everyone to come in with your video and audio. Of course, you can totally opt out if you're feeling shy or just want to stick to the chat. That's totally fine too. But I would love just to have a conversation about your own kind of challenges with planning, where you are now, and please feel free to ask Suzanne anything you'd like. Thank you so much for all of your sage advice and experience.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Does anyone have any questions for Suzanne? I'm slowly bringing you all in here. Oh, go ahead.
Seems like we have one from Tiffany. She says, do you have examples of the community surveys for stakeholders?
We did more of like a census research for ours. Like we didn't like formally survey stakeholders before we built out our lab. However, when we started the grant program, we were asked to put on the workshops well before we were able to launch the lab. And so during the workshops, I would ask patrons, what kind of equipment would you like to see in the lab? Since, we already have an audience who is already going to be interested in using the space. So we took that into consideration. But because, because we were located in LA, where the movie industry lives, we, predicted rightly that people were going to ask for a lot of different formats. So that's why we went with so many different decks to build out our lab. But however, looking back on it, like I do wish that we had started out simple. Like I wish we had started out with just VHS and scanning, the two most popular formats across the board, and slowly added other formats, because I think that did contribute to it was intimidating for staff, like, and bringing in and training new staff, it was intimidating.
Any other questions out there?
Well, I wanted to say hi. I haven't seen you in a while, Suzanne, and you guys are pretty impressive. We did the memory lab training, Elaine and I, back in DC with Suzanne and Kurt. And like you said, we haven't revisited it in so long that I'm super impressed by what you guys have accomplished. And we'd love to take some of this stuff and revisit it and try and get our survey out there and start thinking about how we want to deploy when we get past this COVID. So nice to see you and congratulations.
Oh, good to see you, Barry. I didn't even realize you were there until now. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions? Or if people want to talk about what they're thinking their setup's gonna look like.
Well, I just wanted to chime in here and just say that I'm really impressed with what LAPL has done. And I would say that don't be overwhelmed by everything. You're going to get a lot of information really quickly. And, you want to try to focus on what kind of equipment are you going to get, and have some kind of plan. So it's like, what equipment are you going to get? Not every lab is going to be, a cookie cutter kind of same thing. Other things that I'm kind of encountering as we're trying to get our ducks in a row is what about things like the disclaimers? Do you have to run that by, a county council or some legal department?
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of, these are all things that you have to kind of keep in mind, but don't feel like you have to do it all at one time. You're going to be overwhelmed. Just think of, what equipment are you going to buy? What kind of training are you going to do? A few things that we're doing right now is that we're doing some of our training as videos. So we're going to upload it to our YouTube channel so then people can view it at their leisure. So, just, some things to think about. And, you have a lot of support with everyone else in the CopyCat grant, the Memory Lab Network, and others who have done, similar memory lab setups. And so I just wanted to throw that in there.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. And Jonathan's from Tulare County Library, who got a Memory Lab Network grant last year, right? Or, time is weird right now, but 2019. Yeah. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. We had the training last January, so 13 months ago, and then 2 months later we're just shut down. So it gave us more time to plan, more time to think about things. We got an additional grant for a mobile memory lab. Not a lot of money, but you know what, we're gonna make it work. And it's the Memory Lab Network's been a huge help. And again, we're all here to help you out.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, if you run into any questions, post them in the Slack channel. I used to do that all the time when I was figuring out our lab.
Yeah, Siobhan set up a Slack, which is like a sophisticated chat app basically, but you can also post documents and there's different threads depending on the subject. So it's a really rich resource that I don't know how long it's been up, at least a couple of years. And all of you who've registered for this webinar, Siobhan's going to just send you an invitation, which you could ignore if you like. But please sign in and join the conversation. And I'm also hoping beyond these webinars that we could maybe have little get-togethers informally. I hope we're not all zoomed out. We can't hang out a little bit, but maybe we could do a brown bag either later this month or in March, just to get to know each other in California.
Yeah, I would love that.
Any other questions or?
I just had, I don't know if you can hear me, I have two masks on. A quick question about the trainings. So patrons have to sign up for a training first, and then once they've completed that, they can access the memory lab. Do you ever find any resistance from patrons to do the trainings? I'm just thinking because our community, it's a lot of seniors, and that's who's going to want to use the lab. And I know a lot of them are completely new to technology, period. And we're right next door to a senior center, so I'm just curious if you ever experience resistance from like that demographic.
Yeah. Actually, no, I haven't received any resistance. The only the only time that I could think of was like once when someone, she had every intention of attending the orientation, but because we're in downtown LA, she didn't make it in time to view like most of the presentation, that like she didn't want to come back again to do that orientation, you know, travel all that way. So for her, I made a one-time exception, and I said, you know, these are the slides for the presentation. Please go over them before you come in and like, you know, go over the user agreement and sign it and register for an appointment. And actually, like, I mean, you know, it's just, you know, it's one situation, but it turned out that like when she finally did come in for her appointment, she still needed a lot of help. So I, you know, really do like moving forward, I really will just require that orientation. And I mean, I think, you know, that population is willing to take the orientation, you know, for that very reason, that they are unfamiliar or not as savvy with computers, that they would want more instruction.
Thank you. I'm just thinking, yeah, it might just be easier for us to do the orientation at the senior center before we have people come over.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Yeah, going to where they are, definitely. And especially if they have, I think some senior centers have like lab spaces where you can present.
So Barry asked if we'll send a list around of resources, and we will for sure. And if there's anything that's come up during Suzanne's presentation specifically that you're wondering about, like we'll dig and find it for you. And I can't stress the Memory Lab Network's deep dive document is pretty amazing, and their YouTube channel has tons of videos and their own series of webinars, which some of you are part of.
Yeah, and I think the next slide has links as well that you can reference to as you're building out your labs and putting together your guides. And you can feel free to reach out to me with any questions personally. My email's sim@lapl.org.
Any other questions or commiserations? I'm curious if anyone here is planning to do a mobile setup, or you're in the midst of planning a mobile program.
Actually, like that idea better for us because we don't really have space to have a memory lab. I mean, I know the carts with the wheels on them were perfect from that were mentioned in the last one, for us to just be able to store things and then bring them out when necessary because we are a very small one building library. But yeah, I like the mobile memory lab, especially since this community, we're really just planning on starting with like VHS conversion and photo scanning, and that'll be what we start with, and we'll see how that goes first.
We're planning a mobile a memory lab because we are so far separated in between our areas, so we'll be traveling to 2 other spots besides, well, there's 3 spots. So we're looking forward to that.
That's great.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I definitely recommend one or the other at first, like in your first year at least.
Yeah, I love your inventory list. Thank you for sharing those, Suzanne.
Oh, sure.
And we'll send along a PDF of the slides after this, so you all can have that for reference. Yeah, Suzanne's documentation is pretty amazing. It's great. Thank you.
Oh, well, it's I'm standing on the shoulders of everyone who's built a memory lab before me, including within our own cohort, like Broward County Library and El Pueblo County Library. They built out their labs before, and they're really generous with their documentation. So yeah, I mean, we all build on each other. So it's great to be part of this network. I definitely recommend taking advantage of it.
That's a really great note to end on, because we're out of time. It's at 11:30, and I don't want to keep you all too late because this is long. It's a lot of information, but I appreciate you all so much for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. We basically are scheduling these the second Friday of every month. So the next one coming up is with Jonathan, who's here, Jonathan Waltmeyer and Amy King from Tulare County. They'll be sharing their plans, just where they are now, but also where they're headed, because they're in the early stages of planning. And we'll be speaking specifically on digitization concepts, digital storage, and then continue on their experience. So that'll be great. That's March 12th, and you can register at our Memory Lab page, californiareveal.org/memory labs. Yeah. Thank you so much, Suzanne, for putting this all together. It was really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
We'll see everybody soon, I hope, next time. Okay, bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.